What's the weirdest reason you were called to your boss? Back when I was an intern, a coworker told me to give a pile of papers to my boss and to tell him that he is an asshole. He told me explicitly that I have to call him that way. I went to my boss's office, told him who sent him the papers, and then I told him, well, he also said that I should say something to you, which is really unplea. Is it that I am an asshole? Me, well, yes, but him, it's okay, here's one too. It turned out that those two guys are basically BFFs and that they constantly do something like this. Used to make levels for Quake while taking tech support calls. One day, while modeling a level and doing an FFR disk format reinstall, I notice a boss out of the corner of my eye. Fuck it. I'm busted. I don't even try to hide what I'm doing. Mute the customer and ask if he needs anything. Put yourself in time when you get off this call. I'd like to see you in the pit. The pit was a corner of the call center where all the lead techs and bosses Saturday. My stomach lurches. Okay. I turn my attention back to the caller and finish up in about another 20 minutes. I love this job. I'm really bummed. I switch my status and start walking back to the pit, except now there's 3 bosses right outside my cubicle. Can you do a level that's the floor plan of the call center, with the elevator and all? No shit. I was promoted a month later. I used to grab a chicken sandwich on my first break at work. Apparently, some new hire assumed I was going to lunch 2 hours into my shift. After I came back 15 minutes later, our standard break time, I got called in to ask why I felt I should be going to lunch. Told them I didn't and to check my time card. Why do people even care what others do? Even if you were taking an early lunch, who the F cares? The effort it takes to rat on someone is far too great for me. I was an RA in college, and whenever we had to go on rounds of the apartments, we had to submit a report of what had happened on our rounds. Most of the time nothing happened and there was nothing to write about. However, I got tired of writing a paragraph or two of started rounds, saw no one, finished rounds, so I started making my reports have themes. I wrote them up like my rounds were important plot points in cowboy, Star Wars, or horror movies, and usually included background music to listen to while reading them. At the end of the semester, I ended by submitting a report written in rhyme to the night before Christmas, and he called me in to tell me that he was going to fire me if foregoing probation or any other disciplinary action first, until the dean of students saw the poem and loved it. Edit: since people are apparently concerned about my neglecting of my RA duties, I want to be on the record that I would submit 2 copies every time I had to write reports, one fun one and one that was written in the formal, boring fashion. She wanted me to decorate her office for the Halloween decorating contest since I wasn't worthy of having an office. I said fuck that and decorated the closet by my cube and won. Yeah, I won a Starbucks gift card with $1.90 on it. Appears our HR lady bought a $5 gift card, used that to buy a drink, then sent it to me. I used to work IT in a school, my boss was the principal. I'm gay, this is actually sort of relevant to the story. One of the rules in the school is that principal and VP doors are to stay open at all times, unless they are having a meeting with parents. All the VP and PS doors were closed. This is super odd. There were 4 VPs and a principal, so having them all closed is basically unheard of. Even the administrative staff were freaking out a bit. Finally, I get buzzed into the principal's office. Of course everyone is looking at me like, what did you do? I walk into the office and my boss, an older lady that I totally respect, finishes up her email, pushes her glasses on her face and says, what do you know about Lady Gaga? As it turned out, they were all trying to one-up each other in the talent show and my boss wanted a gay opinion. I told her she needed to do bad romance and kept it from everyone. She had managed to get a large piece of glass lodged into her hand from a picture frame she attempted to catch when she knocked it over. I was working in a college with a nursing department, so I went and got some professors. Another employee who didn't speak the same language as anyone else who happened to be in the office that day had decided to take a nap on his desk. Boss wanted to ask my opinion on what he should do about it because he was flummoxed. The new policy of not transporting wildlife in the work van had to be explained to me, because A, I was the reason the policy came into existence, and B, I was the only person on the site it would ever apply to. It was a sparrow that had flown into a window. I carried it back to the mailroom, found a box, and took it to a wildlife rehabber that night. The employee driving the van was very concerned about this tiny half-ounce bird getting loose in the van and attacking her. Had my boss call me in once because a parent accused me of hitting their child. Apparently the kid came home with a bruise. When they asked me what happened, I explained the kid wasn't even in my room. They were in a class on the other side of the building and I didn't even see them the entire day. Turns out the kid had a hockey game that night before he came home. Guess where the bruise came from? Thankfully, once they had the facts, they pretty much told the parent this never happened. You are mistaken and we are standing by our teacher. It was scary though, cause you seldom get out of these types of accusations without at least a suspension as they look into it. I had a student tell their parents that I sat her in front of the class, looked at her head, and said that she had bugs in her hair and it was gross. Never happened. The parents called the AP. He asked me what happened. Essentially, I just said none of the above. Then he asked me to prove it. I had to explain to him that I couldn't prove what didn't happen. I used to work in a cinema and one day we had a drawing competition for children based on some film or another. I was bored on shift, so drew a really crappy picture, scribbled a load and made it look like a child had drawn it and put by Lasagna Princess aged 7.5. A couple of days later I get called to the GM's office and the picture is on the desk, so I'm like, oh crap, I'm about to get told off for doing this during work hours. GM asked me if I drew it. I got on with him fairly well, so I laughed and opened up to it. Turns out the drawing competition was run by a film company and the winner would win a prize, and the cinema that entered the winner came would also win a prize. My drawing won, and we got a massive TV and games console for our staff room. The prize that should have gone to the winner was given to a child who entered the competition from our cinema. I think it was a family weekend away and a goodie bag. Said good morning after grabbing a water bottle near his office door and got a delayed, mumbled response. A few minutes later I get a "come see me, please" email. I walk in and he asks if he had been snoring and asks for water. I grab him a bottle and he takes a pill, then hands me his keys, which have a market card on them, and asks me to get him a Coke. He is diabetic and a kidney transplant recipient. He had passed out and needed sugar ASAP. Got called into my old boss's office to ask if I noticed how bad one of my coworkers smelled, too. Turns out customers were complaining and he asked me if it was true. It was. Later, the same coworker disappeared and cops showed up saying he might have been involved in kidnapping a girl. He had a couple tabs open and asked me which clutch would go better in his Mini. The weird part was that I was new there. I drove an automatic at the time, and there was a fantastic mechanic who knows basically everything about cars on staff. Both my husband and I have stories. Husband was called into the boss office to help a coworker set up stacks of cardboard boxes with accessories to resemble the boss and his wife having a tea party. Coworker wanted to startle the boss upon his return from a business trip. I was called into the office by the store manager and assistant store manager. They wanted to ask me, as the gay manager, if the new transfer from out of state was gay. I had only met her 5 minutes before. After I stopped laughing, I said yeah, and she's going to transfer in 6 months to another store, in Florida probably, because of a girl. It was 5.5 months, but I was right. In the early 2000s my boss called me in so he could show me Wikipedia, which he had just discovered. He says, ask me anything and I'll find the answer. I asked how many tacos are sold per day in San Antonio. He was angry because that's obviously not a question that Wikipedia can answer. I was told that the fact that I needed to pump breast milk while at work made some of my coworkers uncomfortable. We went back and forth for about 9 months. Finally I gave up and decided on a different career path and called HR. The next day, there was a small room with a lock, no more pumping in the public toilet for me, and everyone knew the proper lingo of if you need a few minutes to pump, just let us know. Then I went back to college in my late 20s, and that was the second best decision I've ever made, the kid being the first. I just love how it made some people uncomfortable that I was lactating. I never offered to show them anything, or bring attention to it. Not boss, but the principal. I got called down once in middle school. Nobody told me I was in trouble until I got there. I was expecting an academic award. He said 2 other students had made a very serious allegation against me and wanted my side of the story, but he wouldn't tell me what I was accused of. So I just sat there saying variations of I don't know, I've barely even talked to these people, why am I here? And then he sent me back to class with a lollipop. That was the last I ever heard of it. Boss and head of HR are in the office when I walk in. They tell me my attitude needs to improve. I say well, when the time comes that I don't have to work 60 to 70 hours a week, that would help. I also said that maybe if I got an ounce of training I wouldn't be so stressed when I'm fixing multi-million-dollar machines. The HR person then tells me, "You need to walk in a more positive way." I was stunned for a moment, then I asked if I heard her correctly. Yeps, I did. I then asked if I could have that in writing. No. End of meeting. Because somebody kept trolling him and flipping his display upside down. Control-Alt-Up. Turns out a coworker plugged in a keyboard with an unusually long cord and would fuck with him every now and then. And this had gone on for months. The guy's solution was to literally flip the tube monitor, early 2000s, upside down with the stand sticking out like an antenna. The loss prevention people called me into their office right as I was going on break. Every possible thing I could have done raced through my mind, to the point I went back from break 3 minutes early. I steeled myself and knocked. They asked me what I bought the previous day and why my boyfriend, now husband, had gone into the dressing room with me. It turns out someone had been leaving used condoms and other messes in the dressing room, and because I had been shopping for clothes and asked my boyfriend to come in and check how they fit, they had to question us, actually, just me, anyway. Also, it was in the other changing room, so they knew it wasn't us anyway. They just wanted me to have a stressful break, I guess. To do the missing no trick so he could get a crapload of rare candies and Master Balls. This was right after Pokemon Red and Blue were re-released for the 3DS. Everyone at our shop was playing it, but I was the only one that remembered how to get the trick to work. My boss also called me through our store's phone network a few times just to ask me which type certain Pokemon were weak to. There's a guy in the company who I guess is known for being real prickly with people who unexpectedly contacted me about something. Somehow a higher-up found out and called me to make sure he wasn't mean to me. Not really called in, but I was starting to learn motorcycle road racing, and I bought a set of bright green racing leathers. For those who don't know, racing leathers cover the entire body. I knew that the CEO of the company was a motorsports enthusiast, who was learning high-speed sports car driving, and working on getting his lap time down. I went to buy my leather suit at lunchtime, and wore it back to work. Then I walked into the boss's office, in my leathers, with my bright yellow helmet. My wife-to-be saw me, and asked her daughter, the head of HR. "Who is that?" Evidently, she found me interesting. My director of sales walked me off the sales floor, and I was scared because he was super intimidating. Once we're off the sales floor, he said a homeless person was in the resort bathroom passed out on the floor, and he needed a female to ensure she was alive or needed medical attention. Turns out she was sleeping in there. I looked up from my desk one day, and my director and the HR director were both there to talk to me. I figured this can't be good. Turns out a troubled children rescue center was being dedicated next door with a time capsule being buried, and they wanted one of our company's IC chips to add to the stash. I'll take things I never would have guessed in 1,000 years, Alex. 100% true story. The first company I worked for went through a massive financial crisis that resulted in half the company being laid off over a 3-month span. Anyway, one day, they tell us our team of 16 was being cut again to 10. They called a company meeting to tell us that the layoffs were happening that day. So they tell us to go back to our offices and wait. The first person they call into the office was me. I had just been promoted to a junior developer after 2 years of interning for them during college. They call me in, looking all sad, tell me to sit, and tell me we aren't laying you off, you can go back. I couldn't believe it. I still can't today. Weirdest layoff I've ever seen. I was called into the office twice to complain about how I showed up to work too early. Mind, at the time I was driving almost an hour to work and couldn't predict when there may be a crash or some other slowdown. I didn't even claim any extra time. I just show up and mostly wait in the break room reading or something. It was really odd to me that I was getting in trouble for making sure I was on time every day. I was called into the GM's office and asked why I felt the need to turn on all the car wash soaps and sprayers in the car wash when one of my employees was in there cleaning. I explained he was in fact not cleaning, he was pretending to clean to avoid doing the tasks I had assigned him. Since the wash tunnel was already clean prior to him even entering, I turned it on to give him something to clean since that's clearly all he wanted to do. Yes, he walked out in a rainbow of soap as if in a cartoon. I was told I did a good job for coming up with creative punishment on the fly, and we had a good laugh. Not me, but my coworker. We had a work potluck for Christmas and everyone would write on a sheet what they were bringing. Dude has the penmanship of a 3-year-old and says he'll bring my wife's dainties, small assorted desserts. Boss read it as my wife's panties and immediately took the guy to HR without even asking what it said. Panties guy is also kind of a spaz and 50 years old, so it was pretty fun seeing it happen. While working a graveyard shift at a local 24/7 diner, I was called into the office and asked if I wanted to go outside and smoke a few bowls in the parking lot in my manager's car. Of course, I had to say yes. I worked at a fast food place as a fry cook, but a slight bit fancier, and during the slow times toward the end of my shift I would sometimes make myself little snacks from the scraps of whatever I had prepped earlier. If we had sliced cheese, it came in huge blocks, I would make cheese sticks for a few people, maybe some potato skins, things of the sort. At one point I was in the middle of making one of these things when our manager came around to check the temperature on everything and he noticed. After he was done he called me into his office. Now, he was the definition of a chill, but usually pretty to the rules kinda guy. He was literally a pro skater before working at this place. And I was kinda worried walking into his office, as he had caught me taking a few fries for myself before. I walked in, he looked at me, and just said, "Hey, before you clock out, can you make me some chicken nuggets?" And I'll be damned if I didn't throw together some flour and spices and shit and make the best chicken nuggets I've ever seen. For working too much. One day, I stayed late to finish a few things. Next day the boss got a complaint that I didn't get permission to do that. I didn't know we needed permission. This was not a paid by the hour job. Someone at my job reported how my ex-boyfriend was harassing me via social media. He worked for another part of the company on campus, and it was the morning after I found out my grandfather died. I thought I was being fired. I cried in front of my head manager and her boss and had to explain it wasn't about the harassment, but the loss of the most important person in my life. Fun times. I think I have a good one. I was called into my boss's office because I wasn't wearing my suit jacket. In an emergency department. When the employee handbook specifically gives the emergency department employees permission to put jackets on seat backs when we are hot. I was summoned to his office so that he could promote me to lab director, a position that he knew I didn't want because I had told him I was 8 months pregnant and didn't want to miss my daughter's life by working 60-hour weeks for the intervening 20 years. And I was quite frankly still hating him after the way he had screamed at me in public the previous week about a perfectly valid decision I made as the deputy lab director while he was out on vacation. What he didn't know was that in that week I had already found a new job as a program manager, so before he could promote me, I dropped my 2 weeks notice. Not my boss, but a new senior staff member called me in to ask if I knew how to make Outlook stop automatically deleting emails from the trash folder. Because he wanted to keep emails in the trash folder to read later. I think I stared at him mutely for several full seconds while trying to process this request. But to this day I still don't understand it. Also, my job isn't IT. My manager and his manager brought me in to congratulate me on being accepted into my company's emerging leader program and handed me a sealed letter of acceptance. They literally congratulated me, then joked, "Well, maybe you should read the letter first just in case." I opened up the envelope to find a rejection letter. Super awkward. I didn't set my chat to away when I went to the restroom. This was a salaried desk job, project management, with no customer interaction or anything. Not a call center or anything like that where availability is part of the job. A coworker was crying on our store floor. I made sure she was okay, not knowing why she was crying. Got called into the office after because it was going against the managers somehow. She was crying about the managers picking on her. He was concerned that I was unhappy in my role because I'd applied for a job in another area of the company. Except it wasn't me, it was someone with the same name and background, who had gone to the same schools. Feels like that guy's been haunting me most of my life. I had a boss who tried to write me up for calling out sick. I was actually sick and had sick days available to use. It ended when I told him I needed a copy of my write-up, which I was entitled to take to HR for verification. He got very upset, but he dropped it. My boss paged me into the office to ask me what the Wi-Fi password was. He is the boss who hired me. We did not have Wi-Fi. I don't know why he thought we did. I worked at a retail pharmacy. He wanted the Wi-Fi for his phone. We aren't supposed to be using our phones at work. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.